So up until now, you all have been doing just typing in raw SQL. That's rarely going to be the case. It will happen, but more often than not, you're going to have a computer program kind of doing that for you. And of course, all the SQL queries you've been doing so far just end up on the command line. So what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be talking about one way to connect Python code to your SQL code, to your SQL database. This isn't so much a way to manipulate the database so much. You're still going to be writing SQL, but it allows you to get that get data from the database and manipulate it in a Pythonic way, and again, write stuff to the database in a Pythonic way. And to do that, we're going to be using a Python library called Psycopg. I don't know if they intended it to sound like psycho, but it's like Psycopg2. I'm sorry? There probably is, but this is the most commonly used Python library for interacting with Postgres.
Is that for Postgres only, or is it for other database structures?
It's just for Postgres. Okay. So I'm going to pip install Psycopg2. Psycopg2, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've already installed it, so that's all good.
Should we follow along or just?
Yeah, you can follow along for this one if you like. But yeah, make sure you pip install Psycopg.
You're doing it globally, right? So just in the it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Just keep in mind if you haven't installed it globally, you're just going to have to install it again next time you want to use it.
We don't have to add the global word in there, right?
You don't have to add the global word in there. Yeah. Next, I'm going to create a database. So I'm going to create DB. I'm going to call this one class roster. And if I do PSQL class roster, did not find any relations, but it does exist. So in class roster.py here, I'm going to import Psycopg2. I'm also going to import OS. So using this library takes a few steps. First off, I need to establish a connection to the database. So I'm going to create a variable called connection. I'm going to set that equal to Psycopg2 connect. And then I'm going to give it a string. I'm going to say db name is equal to class roster. It's also going to ask who the user is. And to get that, I'm going to say user is equal to, and then using some string interpolation, I'm going to set os.getLogin. So in order to connect, it needs to know who the user is. And in order for us to prevent us having to log into our own machine every time we do this, we can use the os.getLogin method to say, I am the user, it's me. So that establishes a connection between this file and our database. Next, I'm going to create a variable called cursor, and I'm going to set it equal to connection.cursor. The cursor is is kind of the mechanism that we use to interact with the database. So once we establish the connection, we create a cursor, and then all of the code that we want to create is going to be executed using this cursor. So now we don't need to really worry about the connection variable again. We've created our cursor. The cursor is going to be doing all the work. So again, so the way this works is we still need to write out a SQL query, and then we can just execute it, and it'll work that way. So you can save that query to a database, a variable. So they call this student table creation query. I'm going to set that equal to create table students. I'm going to give it an ID, which is a serial primary key. I'm going to give it a name, which is going to be varchar. Sounds like a Pokemon. And a favorite food, which is also varchar. So again, you write this out the same way you would a SQL query. with a semicolon at the end and all. So we take this string that we've written, and then all we have to do is tell our cursor to execute it. So we just do cursor.execute using this variable. Once we've executed it, we then need to commit it, meaning that we're essentially saying this is like saving it to the database. I'm going to write connection.commit. And then at the end, I need to close the connection. I'm going to say connection.close. So committing it kind of says, all right, we're executing the code, then we're committing it, making sure that it understands like this is actually happening, make it happen right now. And then closing the connection is just making sure that no errant data can go in and out. Unlikely to happen, but you never know. Then I'm going to run this file by running Python class roster. No errors, that's good. I do PSQL class roster. Now I have a schema here. So this is kind of the most basic use case for how to use Psycopg. We have created a connection. We made our cursor to execute our code. And then we just executed this query written the same way we've been writing SQL this whole time. So pretty basic so far. And it's nothing that we couldn't do right here, right? We could have also run this code just from the PSQL command line. So next, let's do something where we can say, you know, make it a little more Pythonic.
Could you go over what cursor means again?
Sure. So the cursor is an object that the Psycopg2 library has. And the cursor is used to execute the code that we create. So whether you write, you know, you created this string right here, and the cursor's job is mainly to just say, I'm going to execute, I'm going to make this code happen. It's like the connection. It's like, I think there are ways to use it to kind of think of it more like a mouse cursor in some ways. Like there are methods that you can use if you go through the Psycopg documentation, which talks about like when you're searching through your database, you can actually think of it as a cursor that's pointing to a specific table or a specific row. But it's also used to execute the code.
Did we ever create a database itself in here? Or?
So earlier I ran the create DB class roster method from the command line. So I had to create the database first. But once I created the database, then I could connect to it through Python using this library. So that's where I got the DB name.
Oh.
No problem. All right, so I'm gonna kind of continue on with this. So if I want to edit this, so I want to, you know, do things like add some students from this file. What am I gonna have to do first next time before I run this again?
You have to connect back to the database.
You need to make sure that if the database exists, that you want to drop it or not. So because if you try to run this again, it's going to be an error.
Exactly. If I try to run this again, it's going to create the connection. That'll happen every time I run this file. But it'll also try to run this. It'll try to create the table again. And if I do that again, I get an error. Duplicate table relation students already exists. So I can simply comment these two lines out, make sure that it doesn't try to do that again. I could also have a Pythonic way of doing it. I could say, you know, try this. Yeah, to make sure that hasn't happened. Actually, let's try doing it that way. So we could say try. And then it would be accept.
What kind of error? Is it Psycopg error duplicate table error?
Yeah, that looks like the error we're looking for, I guess. So I always need to look up exactly how this works. So if we do try except, so it's something that's very alien to me because like Python, not every coding language has this allow you to like try this unless you get an error. So I could just do try except.
Finally. Right?
Yeah.
Close it finally.
Sorry, I just got a chat thing. Anyone got a, okay, so, so Ian got an error that says operational error, fatal role root does not exist. That sounds like a good thing for Google. I'm not gonna do that at this moment, but Ian, I'm gonna get back to you on that.
Yeah, I got the same thing.
Oh, okay. All right, so now we have 2 people with the error, so let's just do it right now then. So replaced us.getLogin. Did you, Ian, did you use us.getLogin or os.getLogin? Okay. So I'm gonna let's look this up before it messes up everybody. So role root does not exist. I don't like looking at GitHub question pages because they're not usually very useful. Oh man, there's a lot of, let's take out some of these quotation marks. There we go. So I'm saying my PostgreSQL, I can't do anything with PostgreSQL, can't create DB, can't create user. So this isn't using Psycopg2. So I don't think that's exactly what we're looking for. All right, let's take a look at this. All right, so it looks like maybe the problem is with os.getLogin. If you use your own username, that might fix the problem. I'm going to do some more research on that later to figure out why that's happening. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So I'm going to try this way. Set print table already exists. So let's see if this, what happens when I run it now. So now it just prints table already exists without breaking the program. So now I don't need to worry about duplicate tables. All right, so next I want to insert some things into the database. So I'm going to have cursor.execute another query. This one's going to be insert into students, name, favorite food, values, and I'm actually going to do it this way. So I'm going to use the %s notation. So this is an alternative way that Python has of doing string interpolation. And then I'm going to pass in Noah. My favorite food is Thai. Anyone have any guesses of why I would be doing this way instead of A, just writing in them directly here, or using other methods of string interpolation?
Does a comma prevent, as a security measure, SQL injection?
Yes, so this is a security measure against SQL injection. When we execute it this way, it'll take a look at these, and it actually keeps in mind, okay, is this the right type of data that we're supposed to get? And allows us more control over, if we're getting user input, how that goes in. If we just type it in directly or use other methods of string interpolation, it'll just execute it without really worrying about it. So when you're using Psycopg2 here, you want to use the %s method followed by a tuple with the things you want to insert into it. And that's a way to prevent SQL injection.
Does S stand for any of them, or does it stand for string and you would use like D for digit like Java?
I believe it, that's a good question. I believe whenever you're doing string interpolation in Python, I think you always use this %s notation, whatever it is you're interpolating in. So later on, we'll have like a lot more things, and so it'll have multiple data types. And the %s is just saying it's a placeholder for when we insert things from this tuple. And the order does matter here in this case. So we gotta be careful about that. Yep, so I can copy this line, and say, Tom, what's your favorite food?
Sorry?
What's your favorite food?
Mastacholi.
Mastacholi it is. And 0, let's get one more person. Who wants to be in our database?
Pizza.
Who just said that?
I did.
Brian likes pizza. Cool, so now I'm going to clear the screen, clear the terminal that is, run this. Uh-oh. Current transaction is aborted, commands ignored until end of transaction on block. Uh-oh. Let's see. So there was some error here. Let's try to figure out what that was. Any guesses on what I did wrong?
Did you forget to do that format?
Which format? Could be the semicolon. I didn't add semicolon to any of these. Let's see if that shit fixes the problem. All right, so it looks like the semicolon wasn't the problem. So let's see here. Insert into students, name, favorite food, values, %s. Actually gonna get rid of the semicolon if it didn't seem to make an issue yet, just so I can narrow down what the problem was. Really, this is not a very helpful error, is it? No. Current transaction aborted, commands ignored until end of transaction block. What's the problem?
All of the SQL errors feel very ambiguous to me.
Yeah.
I think you would need to send the comma need to be dot format.
Or semicolons after the
Yeah.
like at the very end of cursor execute the function.
Like here?
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I heard some other suggestions. Like, at this point, I am actually genuinely confused. Like because I got insert into students.
I still think you need the semicolon because on line 8 you use the semicolon and it executed properly so that you probably still need the letter. Even though that's not the error right now.
Yeah, so might as well put the semicolons in here, can't hurt. But
or are they this? Yeah, but it's just between the two parentheses at the end on 12, because it is 12. You just add 1.
Yeah.
You can see your line 12 changes to 13. You know that you got to add it for all of them.
Could it be the votes? The SQL thought strings were single votes.
We can try.
Nice. Smart.
No, still gives us the same error.
Actually, under accept, can you do continue after print?
Oh.
That could be it. Let's take a look. Continue not properly in loop.
It's just that you did a semicolon after 11.
A semicolon after 11?
I have no idea, I'm just guessing. But yes.
don't think so, because try except kind of works like an if-else statement, and whatever code, like it'll try this, if it doesn't work, it'll come here, and then keep going. So I think the problem must be with how I've formatted this, but I feel like I've done it the way I've always done it.
Is it potentially with using the double quotes for, so you had for your name, Noah, you had single quotes in there?
So I've tried it with single quotes and double quotes. So I've replaced this with one that from something else.
Did you do the single also before insert?
If you control F and find all the double quotes and the singles.
It changed. Line 13 now, so 12. Oh, you moved it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, I thought I did this the same.
I mean, the other two double quotes with them, those matter?
I don't think so. Like I literally tried this yesterday.
Could it be that you didn't close the connection on the try and then reopen it before? Not close, I mean start committed. Did you connect it and execute manually try? Connection close.
Oh.
Your cursor.
Yeah, I don't have a connection.commit here, but I think the database should still exist from the last time we ran this. Very interesting. I want to apologize for this. This doesn't usually happen.
Okay.
I'm going to take a look at our database real quick. Oops, I can't just do pSQL. I need to do pSQL class roster. So we have students. It's all spelled right. Oops. I wonder if it'll still let me do this. ID, name, favorite food. Values.
You have to indent the Noah and type back. I don't know. I'm just looking at an example.
Yeah. Yeah. It shouldn't be an issue, I would think, because it's all one line. This is one command.
I want to execute what was the error you were getting?
So it says, essentially, SQL transaction. Let's see what happens if I try to run this command directly. If I do student roster or class roster. If I do like insert into students, name, favorite food, values. In this case, it would be John. Or these have to be in parentheses as well, right? John. All right, so it worked there.
Just trying to try it.
Yeah.
I have the error thing pulled up.
Yeah. I'm gonna try just getting rid of this code entirely, because I'm wondering if maybe it's like it's trying it and that's breaking something.
What if you grab all of the double quotes and the single quotes of the entire file?
Well, one thing syntactically that's different about the example is that it goes from double quotes to single and then back to double. On the curriculum readme.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was copy pasted, if that makes a big difference.
Maybe. Oh. Okay. Didn't get an error that time. What I did was I commented out the try except thing. So now if I open up my pSQL and select all from students. Okay. So I wonder if it's something to do with the fact that during that try, we got an error, and the Python code moved on, but the SQL was like the Postgres stuff was still like, hey, you've got an error, we can't continue. So it looks like try except isn't a good call for this particular part because it's still trying to run this code even if it fails. And it looks like that prevented this other code from working. Interesting. So, good to know. I learned something today, which means essentially when you create your table, do that on one file, run that file, then do all of your other code on an entirely separate file so you don't have this issue again. All right, so now we have all of those there. So I'm going to comment these out so I don't execute them all over again. So I'd like to try, okay, now we should be able to get the data from the students now that we've inserted it, right? So I could say cursor.execute, select all from students. Let's see what happens when I run that. All right, nothing. It's probably because I didn't print anything, right?
Yeah. Oh, wouldn't you have to print cursor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
We jump to the end of the line. What's the keyboard shortcut?
Command right. Uh-oh. None. So that's interesting. It didn't return anything. So the reason for that actually isn't because it didn't work, or at least I hope it's because it didn't work. It's because it executed the code, and then in order to actually see that code, there's another, like see what it got, there's another command to run. So I'd run cursor dot, I believe it's fetch all. And then I'm going to print that. There we go. So you can execute the code using the cursor, but to actually retrieve it, you need to use methods like fetch all. There's also one called fetch one. There's plenty of others. And as you can see, it returns me a list of tuples.
I was just going to say, is there one that could fetch a table?
Like fetch, when you say fetch a table,
Like make it look like a table?
Oh, I don't know. We can look that up. Let's take a look at the documentation. So psycopg.org/docs, basic module usage. So let's take a look at cursor, the cursor class. So things it can do, it can close, connection, name, scrollable, withhold, execution, we can execute many. Call proc, mogrify, I don't even know what that means. I like it though. Results retrieval methods, here we go. So cursor objects are iterable, so instead of calling explicitly fetch one in a loop, the object can also be used. So it looks like we could also just iterate over the entire thing, which is cool. That's not what you were asking, but we could also do for record in cursor, print record. So we can try that right now. But let's see if there's anything. For the remote, sorry I didn't mention this. He was asking if it has a method to return it as a table rather than as a list. So that's what I'm looking at now. So when I talked about earlier about scrolling, this cursor can move through all of the table results to find something. Array size, iter size, row count, row number. They have a lot of stuff here. Status message. I'm not seeing anything yet about, yeah, it doesn't look like it has anything specifically about rendering it as a table. Good question, though. Yes. So the cursor is an iterable object, and so we can, once we execute this code, then we can iterate over everything. Yeah, it's kind of like a table. And we can make a program to render it as a table too if we wanted to. Okay. So any other questions about the cursor and kind of this basic use case of writing to the database and reading from the database? Okay. In that case, I'm going to move on to another example. So love it or hate it, CSVs are going to be around forever because people love Excel, and CSV is just an Excel sheet without all the fancy stuff. And often you'll find that CSVs and databases work together. So I've got a big ol' CSV file right here of real estate transactions in Sacramento. Why it's there, I do not know. But it's what we got. So what we're going to do is I'd like to get all of the data off of this CSV and transfer it to a PostgreSQL database. So first off, I'm going to have to create the database. Create DB Sacramento real estate. And my CSV example.py, I'm going to import CSV. I'm going to import Psycopg2. I'm also going to get IPython's embed so we can take a look at things kind of close up. All right, so I'm going to have to read from my CSV file. So I'm going to say with open. And we're going to be looking at Sacramento RE transactions.csv as CSV file. I'm going to create a reader. I'm going to set this equal to a CSV dictionary reader. And I'm just going to say for row in CSV reader, I'm going to use the embed command so we can just kind of pause the program and take a look at what we get. So when I run this and whoop, what am I doing? There we go. Oh no. There we go. So when I run this, and I'm using this dictionary reader here, so how is it going to render every row, do we think? What data type were we expecting to get?
Dictionary.
The dictionary. Let's take a look. All right, so we're in our embed shell. So now I should be able to take a look at row. So as we can see, row does look a lot like a dictionary, except it's not quite that. Because we take a look here, looks like we've got tuples. So city, Sacramento, but we can do things like we can check it like a dictionary does. So if I look at the zip code, for example, I can get the zip code. And I believe, if I check out type row, is that how it works? Yeah, so it's not exactly a dictionary. It is something called an ordered dictionary. It's kind of like a combination of dictionary and list. I could convert it to a dictionary though. So using this, we should be able to, we have access to all this data, every row. Using this data, we can insert it into our database, right? There's a problem though. Does anyone see what the problem might be?
It's in JSON.
Yeah, so it's not structured as SQL yet. It's not JSON at this time. Right now it's dictionary. But for example, things like square feet, when we create our table, what data type do you anticipate using for square feet?
Integer.
Integer, right? What kind of data is stored in our CSV? Strings. So we're going to have to take a look at each piece of this data and make sure that it's fit to be put into our database before we do so. And so that action is sometimes called sanitizing. So what we need to do is first we need to create our table. And then before we insert every row into this, we need to sanitize every row to make sure that we're not mismatching any of our data. So, of course, also the problem with using embed is I can quit out of this, but then it just goes again because we're in a loop. So I'm actually going to kill the terminal. Start again. All right, so I'm gonna get rid of that for now. Actually just replace it with pass. So before we do anything else, we do need to create the database. So we can make a method called create table. We could say, all right, create table query. Let's call it that. So instead of saving it to a variable, I'm just going to save it to a method. Kind of same diff. Return, create table. Let's call them properties. And then it's going to have a lot of different things. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this command because it's a lot. And you all don't want to have time to just watch me type out one long line of code. So, but we got create table properties. It's got an ID, serial as primary key, street address is varchar, city is varchar, zip code is varchar, state is varchar, number of beds is an integer, number of baths is an integer, square feet is an integer, property type is varchar, sale date timestamp, sale price integer, latitude is a decimal, and longitude is a decimal. So it's a lot.
I have a question on.
Yes.
When you do varchar, does it default to the 255 or?
Yes.
Okay. Can you specify it within this or?
Yeah, I could specify here if I wanted to, but I don't feel like it.
No,
So you don't have to say anything.
Yeah. One thing I am actually going to do is sometimes you'll want to make sure if you're going from like a CSV file to a database, you'll notice that some of the table rows, table columns here don't match the rows that we had in our CSV file. Like it's instead of square feet, it's SQ feet. And we have like things like bed instead of beds, it's in baths, it's number of beds and baths. So that's another thing to keep in mind when we're going through this.
If it has a max of 255, does it allocate 255 characters in memory? Or does it just say, is it just like an error if you try to put more than 255?
I know there will be an error of some kind if you try to put more than 255 characters into it, but I don't know how that deals with allocation of memory exactly. All right, so also I've got some data types here that aren't available to vanilla in like regular Python, specifically decimals and timestamps. So I'm going to do some importing here. So I'm going to say from the decimal library, I'm going to import the decimal class. And from datetime, I'm going to import datetime. Yes?
Does that decimal library get rid of that error or in floating points when you try to add 0.3 to 0.2 and you get a really wrong answer? Is that what it's there for?
I'm not sure if that's what it's there for. I can only tell you what we're using it for here, which is it's not expecting a float. It's expecting it's expecting a decimal type. So we're using it here to make sure our data types match what it's expecting. But if you're curious about the decimal library, there's plenty of documentation on it on the Python website. So that's something to look into if that's a problem you want to solve. All right, so I'm going to also make sure I can establish the connection with my server. Sacramento real estate. And user is os.getLogin. I'm going to create my cursor. Cursor equals connection.cursor. And I'm going to execute the table creation, create table query. So that'll create our table. And now we need to make sure that as we go through things that we are cleaning the data and then inserting something that we can use. So I'm going to make another method called clean data. It's going to take a CSV row as an argument. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say cleaned, and I'm going to say convert CSV row into a dictionary. So it's no longer an ordered dictionary. It's now we have a regular dictionary called cleaned. And so now we need to do things like make sure that all of our rows match up with this. Excuse me. So we could do things like, you know, cleaned street address equals clean. So actually, like things, so cleaned, or let's call it, you know what? I just realized something. This is annoying because I don't want to have to replace things like that. So what I am going to do is, just for the interest of time, because this method isn't that exciting to do and it's all something you know how to do, I am actually going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our this to match the CSV instead. So that way we only need to change the things that actually need to change their data type. We don't need to say, hey, this is street address, not street, because that's, just at this moment, it's not that interesting. So I believe it was zip, beds. Honestly, the beds and number and baths makes more sense than number of beds, number of baths anyway, if you ask me. And let's see here, was it type? Yep. I think sale date was the same. Price instead of sale price. Latitude and longitude do the same. There we go. This is going to save us a lot of time. So now I can just say, all right, street address is the same, city's the same, zip code's the same, state's the same, because they're all strings, varchars. But like the beds is going to have to be an integer. So I can say cleaned beds equals int cleaned beds. And cleaned baths is going to have to equal int cleaned baths. Same thing with square feet. Let's see here. The type should be the same. For the sale date, we're going, or was it sale date or just date? Sale date, we're going to have to change it into a date time. So we're going to say cleaned sale date equals, we're going to use date times strp time method, which allows us to kind of format it. So strip time.
strp time?
I'm not sure what the strp stands for exactly, but it allows us to, it's a method that allows us to format things. So the first thing it's going to take is some kind of datetime object or something that looks like a datetime object like this. And it's going to convert it into a datetime object instead of a string. Oops. There we go. So the first thing it's going to take is cleaned sale date. And the second argument is going to be the format. And we're going to do, in this case, month, day, year format. So I would do %m, %day / %y. So it's going to save it as a date in this format, month, day, year. So strip time there. I realized I never imported OS. Strip time allows us to just format it into a date time in the way we want it to be. Just got a Slack from Steve. All right, so cool. So we can use something called a with. So try with to help with that thing where we don't do the thing twice. So I'll try that. So I'll take a look at that later. Thank you, Steve. All right. So anyway, the price can remain the same. The last things that need to change are the latitude and the longitude. So I'm going to say cleaned latitude. I'm going to convert it into a decimal. And longitude. So if you're thinking that this seems kind of boring, it is. There are some things that there isn't necessarily a quick, fun, easy way to do it. Sometimes you just got to convert a bunch of tables in a dictionary into other data types. And yeah, it's not sexy, but it works. So I'm going to return this. So it's going to give me cleaned data where everything is the data type it's supposed to be, so we can insert it into our database. So now when we're opening our CSV file, then we can say, cleaned data equals clean data passing in row. And then again, I'm going to copy code from the example here because it's a lot. Yeah, because we're inserting what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 columns per row. But hopefully that'll work.
You have to change the names. Did you change the names?
I did. I made sure that oh, you're right. I do need to change this. Thank you. So is it just street or is it address? Street, yeah. So city, zip, state, beds, baths. And this was SQ double underscore FT for some reason. I'm not going to question it. There we go. All right, so then we have to commit it. So connection.commit. And then we close the connection. All right, fingers crossed for this. Ah, great. What did we get wrong? Key error, street address.
Yeah, these ones are changed.
You're right. Fine. Should have done that earlier when I could have command D'd, but now there's no choice. Okay. However, we didn't get an error when we created the database. So I'm gonna comment that line out so we don't do it again. Great, now what? line 28, relation properties does not exist. Oh, so maybe it didn't work. So let's run it all again. Ah, you're right. So that's the thing I should have remembered, is the reason we have this connection.commit down here is because until it hits this line, none of this code that we write is actually real, essentially. It doesn't actually get sent to the Postgres server, the Postgres database, until it hits that line. So even though it ran cursor.execute this here, it didn't actually get sent to the database until it got here, but it ran into an error first.
Is that commit required? Like if you didn't have line 30, it would never save it?
I believe so. So now if I do PSQL, Sacramento, oops, not CSV. What was it? Sacramento, what did we call it?
Real estate.
If I do select all from properties. Oh, there we go. So now we have a nice old table here of everything. Cool. Any questions on how this has happened? You know, dealing with key values aside, how we executed this code, does this all seem familiar to everybody? It's not that different than the SQL queries you're already doing, yeah? So I would just like to kind of talk about a little bit about how we can actually, like, why using Python is an advantage at all. So first off, I'm just gonna, again, comment out this code so it doesn't run again. Because it's not necessarily a more efficient way of adding things to the database, though with things like CSV it is, because then we could just run everything that way. But now we should be able to, we can do things like understand more about, let's say we wanted to figure out, on average, what's more expensive, residential homes or condos? Because if we look at our database up here, there should be two types, residential and condo. And that's not something SQL can really help us with per se. It can help us find the information, but Python is a more easy way to kind of look at everything and go, all right, now we can figure out the average of all of this and then decide what to do. So for example, I could say, all right, cursor.execute, and I'm going to say select price from, what was it, properties, where type equals condo. I think it's with a, and then I could say condos equals cursor.fetchAll. I do print condos here. So I'm going to clear the terminal, get rid of that pop-up. Oh, great. Column condo does not exist. Oh, do I need to put this in quotes? Like so? Except that these need to be in double quotes now. There we go. So now I have a list of tuples of the price of every condo. Then I could just kind of do the same thing here, except where type equals residential. And then,
IAM?
yes?
Is it IAM? Is it show?
Oh, thank you. Residential. And then residentials equals cursor.fetch all. I could say print out residentials. Get out of here. It wants to be helpful so bad. So a lot more residential homes than condos in this case.
Can we have just done it from the just from SQL2, right? We have done the same thing now, or
Yeah.
are we doing something different?
Yeah.
When it's with the Python?
Yeah. So at this point, we haven't done anything that SQL can't do. But if we wanted to make a method called like compare average price, then we could say, do all this. And now we have so now we have data, and we can make a function that says, all right, I want to find the average of both of these and compare them. So let's see how would we do that? What's the best way to find get the average price from a list of tuples like this? An ordered dictionary.
Iterate through each variable, and then establish two variables that are the sums.
Yep.
Did you convert it to a regular list before? Or?
Yeah, we could probably convert them to lists. So we could say, because in this case, since we're only getting the prices, a list will do us just fine here. And then if I get rid of this real quick, just to make sure we know what we're doing, I print out condos down here. Why? All right, we didn't actually run the function. All right, looks like it's actually the same here.
What are you trying to do?
I was trying to convert this ordered dictionary into a list, because in this case we don't really, we have tuples, but each tuple. So we can kind of undo.
Actually, if you hover on it, it'll say dictionary.
Yeah, and we could also turn them into dictionaries.
Yeah. Dictionary.
And then print it out. Let's see what we're working with now. Dictionary update sequence element 0 has length 1, or 2 is required. All right, since it looks like we're just stuck with our list of tuples thing then in that case. Oh well. So knowing that we're working with an ordered dictionary, which is just a list of tuples, we still need to figure out the average price of both of these. So you could say, call it C AVG for condo average equals 0 for now. Or C total, let's call it that. Say for condo in condos, we should be able to just say C total plus equals condo 0. And then in this case, we could say C AVG equals C total divided by LEN of condos. And then we could do the same thing for residents. So we could say R total equals 0 for res in residentials. R total plus equals R res 0. And then R AVG equals R total divided by LEN of residentials.
How do we know it was index 0 of the object?
By looking at it, because this is our list of tuples here. And so it looks like the tuples only have one thing in the index, only one thing indexed, which has to be at 0.
Okay. Cool.
So it's like, because remember tuples and lists operate in many of the same ways. You just can't change a tuple once it's been defined. All right, and then we could say, if RAVG is greater than CAVG, I don't know why I keep on adding that extra letter. Return, just like, we could actually just print residentials are more pricey, else print condos are more pricey. So I'm going to clear that. Okay. What did I do wrong here? Residentials. It's not defined. On line 47, it says, I still have this line. Condos are more pricey. Yeah. So essentially, see, the difference between using this versus using Psycopg versus using just raw SQL is when you use Psycopg, you have access to all of Python's methods of interacting with data so that you can create functions that can do things based on the data that's in the database, as opposed to just raw SQL, which is you can manipulate the database and get information from the database, but that's it. All right, it's been about an hour, so what questions do you have about Psycopg and SQL?
Maybe like going back to Ken was having the problem, and I think we are having problem with connecting to the database using the OS.
Yeah, the OS get login.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take a look at how the OS.get login function actually works.
Like I was able to do it.
Hey Noah, I just posted something in the Slack page about that.
Oh, all right, let's take a look. So importing the get pass library seemed to be a good alternative. So you do not get the role root does not exist if you're getting that error. And so if you print out os.get login, you'll get root back. But if you get pass to get user should return your username instead. Okay, so if the OS version of get login doesn't work, try using the get pass library instead, which also has a get user method. So maybe so try that out. Thank you, Brian. What other questions exist? Okay, so in that case, so we've only got one new challenge for you today. It's called Chicago Salaries. It's a big one. So but it's actually also a really cool one because you're going to be working with real life data sets provided by the city of Chicago. So if you go to the City of Chicago website, they've got a huge website full of CSV data about the city, from everything from, in this case, you're going to be looking at the salaries of public employees, but you can also look up things like property licenses, public Wi-Fi is one thing I found. So honestly, just, this is going to be a paired programming work, so this is going to, you'll be working with a pair on this, but in your spare time, I would just take a look because it's amazing what kind of stuff you can interact with, and it's just all freely available.
I think last time I taught this one last time, I